Late October in the Tennessee hills. A gravel road that ends where the county forgot to keep going. Fog moves low across 280 acres of blue-veined grass, past a red barn tilted 9 degrees toward the sunrise, past a stable half swallowed by maples, up to a silver-boarded farmhouse, where the porch light has been burning for a dead man 3 weeks. On the top step, a young woman in a patch blue cardigan, cracked boots, a brass key gone warm in her palm. She has $6 in her purse and 3 nights of sleeping in a car behind her. Somewhere out past the stable, a bell no hand is touching rings. Once. She does not flinch. She looks at the door. Because a whole town has feared this farm for 30 years. A whole family laughed her name out of a lawyer's office on Friday. And behind that door, a dead man has left something for the only person who came asking what happened here. She turns the key. The hills of Hollow Fork, Tennessee, wear their autumn late, the way old people wear coats indoors. Amberleaf Farm sits at the end of a gravel road that stopped being maintained the year Reagan left office. 280 acres of blue-veined grass and hardwood. A farmhouse gone silver from weather. A red barn tilted 9 degrees toward the sunrise. A stable half swallowed by maples. And on the sagging porch, a girl of 20 stands with a brass key gone warm in her palm. She has $6 in her purse. She counted them out this morning onto a notary's counter. A $5 bill worn soft as flannel. 4 quarters she'd been saving for the laundromat. The whole family laughed in the lawyer's office when her name was read. $6. $6 is what a dead man had decided her whole inheritance was worth in cash, and $6 is what she had, coincidentally, in her purse. And $6 is exactly the amount that a young woman with nothing else can carry into a room full of laughing cousins and walk out again with her back straight. But the real wealth wasn't the farmhouse. It was hidden behind a panel a dead man had left for whoever finally came looking. Her name is Idany Ridgway, 20 years old, 6 months a widow to her own mother. That was the word Merrill Ridgway had used sitting up in a hospital bed with a paper cup of ice chips going watery in her hand. Being widowed early, baby, not from a husband, from me. Merrill had said it on a Tuesday in April and died on the Thursday. Idony had left nursing school her second year to sit at that hospital. She didn't tell her professors, she just stopped showing up. Because the alternative was watching a woman who had never asked her for a thing die alone under fluorescent light. Savings run out. The little apartment they shared on the north side of Chattanooga started smelling like the antiseptic Merrill had rinsed her mouth with that dry chemical breath, and Idany couldn't wash it out no matter what she scrubbed. And 6 months after the funeral, her roommate Lorena, a good woman, not cruel, just done, put a note on the fridge that said the rent was going up $70 and she was sorry. Idony read the note twice. Then she went to the bank. The bank told her what she already knew. 3 nights she slept in the Corolla. First night in the Kroger lot on Brainerd Road because the lights stayed on, and a woman alone at least looks watched. Second night on a residential street off McCallie, until a man with a flashlight tapped her window and told her kindly that this wasn't the sort of block where you could do that. Third night she drove 20 miles east, parked at a rest stop off I-75, put her mother's blue cardigan over her legs and cried the way you cry when the sobs are older than the reason. That was Wednesday. Thursday afternoon the phone rang. The number was one she didn't recognize. She almost let it go. But when you have 3 nights in a Corolla and $41 in checking, you answer. The voice on the other end introduced itself as Palmer Whitcomb, attorney to her late great-uncle Bertram, great-uncle. She'd heard the phrase maybe 4 times in her life. Bertram Ridgway, Merrill's uncle on the paternal side. A man Idany had met once a summer she couldn't quite remember when her mother drove her up into the mountains for reasons Merrill never explained. Palmer said he had passed on the 11th. Peaceful, they were told. In his own bed. Peaceful. In his own bed. Idany stared at the peeling ceiling of the rest stop and thought about how her mother had died in a room that smelled like plastic and lemon cleaner. The voice went on. There was a will. The reading was Friday morning. Would she come up to Hollow Fork? Palmer's voice had a slight lengthening in the vowels, the sort of Southern lawyer voice that took its time on purpose. She said she would be there. She hung up before he could finish the word customary. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Her hair had come loose from its bun. Meryl's sweater, the faded blue cardigan with the elbow patched in a rectangle of tan flannel that didn't quite match, smelled like a car seat. $6. She had $6 in her purse and 41 in checking and a tank of gas that would just about get her there. The Corolla started on the second try. It always did. She drove up through the smoke of the mountains that Friday morning. Hollow Fork announced itself with a wooden sign that had lost half its letters to weather. HOOWFRK. Pop, 812. She passed a diner called Miller's and a hardware store called Nash & Son and a Baptist church with the marquee still saying faintly, "The harvest is past, the summer ended, and we are not saved." Meryl would have laughed at that. Meryl had a laugh like a screen door slamming. Palmer's office sat above the bank. Idany climbed the stairs in her patched cardigan, in her crack-soled boots, and a plastic bag from a grocery store that had gone out of business in 2019 because that was where she'd put her toothbrush and her mother's wedding band on its silver chain and a paperback of Wendell Berry she'd been failing to finish for 2 years. The receptionist looked up. The receptionist looked her up and down. The receptionist did not offer coffee. Palmer Whitcomb was 46 and wore a signet ring and a suit the color of wet oatmeal. His office had the smell of old paper and expensive cologne and older cologne trying to cover newer sweat. 3 other people were already seated when Idany came in. She'd never met any of them. She knew who they were the way you know the make of a car by its grill. Cousins, on the Ridgeway side. The ones who'd sent Christmas cards every 3rd year and never come to Meryl's funeral. The oldest of them, a woman, perhaps 50 in pearls that were too new, glanced at Idany's sweater, then at Idany's boots, then at Idany's plastic bag, then away. Palmer stood. Palmer smiled. Palmer arranged papers. Uncle Bertram, he began in that vowels taking their time voice, was a man of some particular convictions. Something flickered on the pearled woman's face. Amusement. Palmer read through the preliminaries. Cash accounts split 3 ways among the cousins, roughly $140,000 each. Idany felt her stomach turn, not because she'd expected any she hadn't, but because $140,000 was more money than her mother's entire chemo had cost, and Meryl had died anyway. Then the good farmland, the tobacco allotment, the mineral rights on the East Ridge, split 3 ways. Then Palmer's voice changed, just slightly, the way a man's voice changes when he's about to enjoy something. To his grandniece Idany Ridgeway, daughter of his niece Meryl, he leaves Amberleaf Farm in its entirety and all contents thereupon together with the sum of $6 in cash to be paid as notary and transfer fee effective immediately upon her taking possession. Silence. Then the pearled cousin laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. She turned to her brother and shook her head like they were sharing a private joke at a funeral. "Amberleaf," she murmured. "Oh, Lord, Amberleaf." The brother chuckled. The third cousin, a thin man in a windbreaker, just closed his eyes and shook his head, the way you do when a punchline you saw coming still lands. Palmer smiled. Palmer set the will down. Palmer folded his hands. "Cousin," he began, and Idany understood from the way he said it that this was the first of many times he would use that word. Uncle Bertram wasn't entirely well toward the end. There was a legal doctrine called laches. She had 30 days to file a challenge or simply walk away. No one in the room would blame her. The pearled cousin murmured that the place would eat her alive. The brother added without particular urgency that it had eaten 3 of them already. Idany looked at Palmer. She looked past Palmer at the $6 her great-uncle had allotted her. Not the $6 in her purse, but the $6 written into a will by a dead man who had apparently known she would arrive with nothing. Something in her chest sat down and did not move. She asked where she paid the fee. Palmer blinked. She said the $6 and asked again where. Palmer gestured awkward now to the receptionist's desk in the outer room. She rose. The cousins were still watching her. She could feel it the way you feel wet fabric. She walked out to the desk. She opened her purse. She counted onto the counter one at a time the folded $5 bill worn soft as a handkerchief and the 4 quarters she'd been saving for the laundromat. $6. She heard the pearled cousin laugh again. She heard Palmer clear his throat. She heard through the office door the brother say in a voice not really trying to be quiet that she'd be back in Chattanooga by Sunday. Ione took the notary's receipt. She folded it once. She folded it twice. She put it in the pocket of her mother's cardigan. Then she walked back into Palmer's office and stood in the doorway and said nothing until the room went quiet. One word: keys. He handed her the brass key. It was warm from his hand. She did not thank him. At the door, he offered a last kindness in the tone lawyers use to make disappointment sound like advice. That land wasn't well, he told her. Not the buildings, the land. 3 men had tried to make something of Amberleaf, and 3 men had failed. Uncle Bertram was the last, and by the end he was, and here Palmer searched for a word unwell. In himself. If she wanted his honest counsel, she would take the 30 days. Walk away. Go home. Home. He said the word like he knew where hers was. She looked at him. She counted silently to 3. She told him she didn't have one, and she walked out. Miller's Diner sat on the corner of Main in something the town had renamed twice and given up on. The vinyl booths were the color of old butter. The coffee was terrible. Idony sat in the back booth with a cup she hadn't drunk and the brass key on the formica in front of her and tried to figure out what a person is supposed to do when a dead man leaves her a house she doesn't have the gas money to reach. The bell over the door went. She didn't look up. Because in a town this size, everyone looks up when the bell goes, and she didn't want to be the one who looked new. A man's shadow crossed her table. I was maybe 58, silver at the temples, suit that cost more than her Corolla was worth. Business card already balanced between 2 fingers like a magic trick. The face of a man who had learned early that if you smile just a little less than the other person, they will work harder to earn it. Cyrus Hollenbeck, he introduced himself. Silver Pine Holdings, out of Chattanooga. The city hit her behind the ribs. She kept her face still. He slid into the booth across from her without waiting for an invitation. He set the business card next to the brass key. Card and key, like he was showing her which one he'd rather she pick up. Frankly, Miss Ridgway, he said he would be direct because he respected her time, and imagined she respected his. His voice had a Chattanooga smoothness to it, the kind of Southern that had been to business school. Amberleaf had come onto his radar 6 years ago. Timber mineral roadway easement. He had made her late great-uncle 3 offers. Bertram had turned each of them down for reasons that would die with him. He paused. He waited. He had Idony notice the patience of a man who had never had to hurry for anything. He offered $310,000 for the parcel. Cash, closing in 10 business days. All fees on him, $310,000. Idony did not move. It was her mother's chemo twice. It was a small apartment. It was 2 years of nursing school and a decent second-hand car and a savings account. It was in the language her body understood sleep. She looked at the card. She looked at the key. Frankly, ma'am, Cyrus went on, and here he leaned a little forward, and his eyes did something almost warm, almost fatherly, and it was that almost that told her exactly what he was. That land wasn't worth saving. And if he might be direct, neither was what was left of her. He didn't mean that unkindly. He looked at her and saw a young woman who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time. He would like to make it possible for her to put it down. The pearled cousin's laugh in Palmer's office. That same tone, just wearing a nicer coat. Idony took her time. She took a sip of the coffee she wasn't drinking. She set the cup back down. She looked past him out the window at Main Street, where a woman in a wool coat was walking a Jack Russell that didn't want to walk. She thought about the way her mother had asked her once in the last week whether Idony still remembered what her voice sounded like laughing. She hadn't seen it yet. That was what she told him. Cyrus Hollenbeck smiled. Just once. Just briefly. He recommended strongly that she see it before dark. Amberleaf, he told her, had changed a great many minds after nightfall. He tapped his card. He stood. He straightened the fall of his jacket. At the door he paused and turned back because men like Cyrus Hollenbeck understand the value of a final beat. The offer was good through Monday. Frankly, it would not be good through Tuesday. He hoped for her sake she'd make the right decision. The bell went. Idoni sat in the booth another 20 minutes without moving. She was not, she realized, thinking about the offer. She was thinking about the way he had said what's left of you. Like there was a version of her he had already crossed off. Like grief had a resale value and hers wasn't quite worth what he was paying. She picked up his card. She tore it in half, then in quarters, then in eighths. She left the pieces next to her untouched coffee. She kept the key. Now let me stop here a moment. Because if you've been counting, and I know some of you have, Idoni Ridgway now owns 280 acres of Tennessee. She has never seen, has just under $6 in her purse, and has turned down more money than her mother earned in 10 years of double shifts. Damn. 20 years old, $6, a dead uncle, and a man in a suit who called her worthless with a smile. This is the part of the story where a reasonable young woman drives back down the mountain. But Idoni Ridgway is not at this moment reasonable. She is angry, and anger, as anyone over 60 already knows, is sometimes just love with nowhere left to go. The road to Amberleaf ran east out of Hollow Fork and gave up on being asphalt about 4 miles in. Idoni followed it in the Corolla with the windows cracked because the heater had never worked right, and the smell of engine oil kept her awake. Maples closed over the road. October had begun the slow business of undressing them. The light came down in coins. The sign at the driveway had gone. Only the 2 posts remained and a length of chain that had once said, presumably, something. Beyond the posts, a wooden bridge crossed a creek she would later learn was called Whitethorn. The bridge was 18 feet long. It had no rails. She stopped the car and got out because she wasn't sure the boards would hold, and she wanted to see first whether she was the kind of person who was going to cross. She was. The Corolla bumped across. The boards groaned. The creek beneath was clear and moving fast the way creeks move in Tennessee in October, when the leaves have started to fall in and the water hasn't yet given up its summer opinions. Then the farmhouse. It rose from a fold in the hill like something remembered rather than seen. 2 stories, silver siding gone soft with weather. A porch that sagged on the east end where a joist had given up around maybe the time Reagan gave his farewell address. Behind it a red barn, and the red had gone rust, and the rust had gone rose, tilted 9 degrees toward the east, the way a man leans into a punch he's already decided to take. Farther back a stable half swallowed by maples, and behind all of it, 280 acres of blue-veined grass rising into the trees. Idoni stopped the Corolla in the driveway. She turned off the engine. She sat. The silence came in. It was not, she noticed, a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a place that was listening. She got out. Her boots crunched on gravel. She climbed the 3 steps of the sagging porch. The brass key in her hand had gone warm again, from her palm this time, not Palmer's. The lock accepted the key with a long, tired groan. Bertram Ridgway's coat hung on a peg by the door, as if he had gone out for the mail and would be right back. She stood in the doorway a long moment, because it did not feel like an empty house. It felt like a held breath. His reading glasses on the side table folded closed. A coffee mug turned upside down on the drain board. A wool throw folded over the back of the armchair by the wood stove. The armchair still keeping the shape of him. She stepped inside. She whispered not to be heard, but because whispering was what the room required, that she was here, Uncle Bert. The house did not answer, but somewhere in a wall she couldn't see something small settled with a click, like a lock accepting a key. She spent the afternoon opening windows. She swept the kitchen. She found a broom in the pantry with the bristles worn down on one side, the side a right-handed man would have leaned on. Bertram had been right-handed. She was learning things about him from angles. The kitchen had a big oak table scarred with 100 coffee cup rings. none of them quite overlapping. The living room had a stone fireplace with a mantel so old the wood had gone black under the varnish. On the mantel stood a single photograph. A man in his 40s, no jacket sleeves rolled, standing by the red barn with a hand on its side, the way a father rests a hand on a boy's shoulder. On the back, in a spidered hand, 6 words. Some things are safer when forgotten. Idoni read it twice. She set it back exactly where she'd found it. By dusk, she'd cleared enough of the downstairs to feel like she wasn't trespassing. She'd found tinned soup in the pantry, 3 cans, the labels sun-bleached. She heated one on a wood stove that started with some coaxing, like a horse that had once been a champion and had recently decided that was another life. She sat at the oak table and ate the soup with a spoon that had a Ridgeway monogram worn nearly off. The light died over the hills. The hills went blue. The blue went black. That was when she heard it. Thump, just above her head. Upstairs, a single weighted sound. The kind you make when you shift your weight from one foot to another. She set down her spoon. Thump, slower, to her right, as if crossing the upstairs hallway. She sat perfectly still because that was what her body decided to do before her mind had time to object. Every one of her mother's stories about the Ridgeway house, the ghost stories Meryl had told her at bedtime, laughing back when Meryl still laughed, moved through her at once. She was not, she reminded herself, superstitious. She was a nursing student. She believed in causes. Thump. She stood. She took the iron poker from the wood stove. She crossed to the foot of the stairs. She called out. The house did not answer. She climbed. One step, then another. The stairs creaked, but each in a different note. And she had the uncanny sense that the house was singing a scale it knew the words to. At the top of the stairs, 3 doors. All closed. All locked, she found when she tried them. She tried the 4th, a narrow one at the hall's end. Locked also. Silence. She went back down. She sat at the table. She ate the rest of her soup. Her hand was shaking, so she made it stop by holding the spoon differently. Later in the dark, the bell rang. Just once. From somewhere out beyond the stable. A single small iron, ringing the kind of bell a hand might strike, but softer, as if a wind had struck it. Except there was no wind. The trees were still. The night was so still that Idoni could hear her own pulse in her ears. She went to the door. She opened it. She stood on the porch. The bell hung on a post beside the stable 30 yards off. She could just see it in the last blue of dusk. It swung gently. Once, twice, a third time. Then it stopped. There was no wind. Idoni stood on the porch a long time. That was when she saw the dog. He came out of the tree line at the corner of the pasture. An old border collie mixed the color of a shale road after rain. His left ear had been notched at some point in his life in a shallow V that had healed clean. His left eye had gone milky the way old dogs' eyes do when the light has stopped mattering to them. His muzzle was gray, the gray of a photograph. He walked with the careful, considered walk of an animal who had decided some time ago that hurrying was a young animal's mistake. He came to within 8 feet of the porch. He sat. He did not bark. He did not whine. He looked at her. Idoni stood very still. She spoke to him softly. The dog's tail moved. Once. She went back inside. She came out with the last of the soup, a heel of bread from Bertram's bread box that had mercifully not yet gone bad. She set them on the porch step. She sat down on the top step 3 feet above. The dog rose. He came forward. He ate slowly without hurry, chewing each mouthful the way an old dog chews. When he was done, he sat again. Not closer, not farther. He watched her. She understood without knowing how, waiting for what she couldn't say. She asked him whether he had a name. His tail moved. Once. She asked whether he was going to tell her. The tail did not move. All right, she said. Copper. She didn't know why. His coat had no red in it. But something about the way he sat, solid pennyweight, unspendable, made the name settle. Copper stayed on the porch until she went inside. When she looked back through the window, he had lain down on the boards, his gray muzzle on his paws, his one good eye toward the driveway, as if watching for something or someone. She went to bed on the couch in the living room because she wasn't ready for the stairs yet. She pulled Bertram's wool throw over her legs. She listened to the house. The thumps did not come again, but once deep in the night she heard faintly the bell ring a fourth time. She did not get up, because in this she understood in the way you understand a dream just before waking the bell was not for her. Not yet. Morning came slow. She woke to a slice of sun across the wool throw and the smell of a house that had not been lived in for weeks. Copper was on the porch when she opened the door. He rose. He did not come to her, but he did not leave either. The notch in his left ear, the milky left eye, the gray muzzle, exactly as he had been the night before. She drove into town for supplies. At the general store, which shared a building with the pharmacy and a floral wire service and a sign for Sunday school lessons, she loaded a cart with cleaning things. Bleach, a jug of vinegar, rags, a pair of canvas work gloves, 2 lanterns and a set of batteries, 3 tins of dog food, because the moment she'd picked up the first one she'd known she was going to. At the register, a woman of maybe 78 was ringing up. She had white hair pulled back so tight it seemed to be sharpening her face. Her name tag said Cressida. Her eyes went first to Ideni's boots, then to the sweater, then to the cart, then to Ideni's face. She rang the items through. She did not comment, not until the dog food. Amber leaf, just the word. Ideni nodded. Staying or clearing? The older woman's voice was flat, unhurried, the voice of somebody who had asked the question a lot of times in her life and had not been in a hurry for any of the answers. Staying, Ideni said. Cressida rang the last tin. She hit the total. She did not for a moment tell it to Ideni. Then, without looking up, she said that Bertram wasn't crazy. Stubborn, yes, not crazy. There was a difference, and Ideni should know it. The line behind Ideni had grown by 2 people. Neither pretended not to listen. He heard those noises too, Cressida went on. The knocking, the bell. She was folding a paper bag, her hands doing it without her watching them. Ideni should ask herself something. She should ask herself why a man born on that farm had slept 50 years in the upstairs bedroom, and then one October in 1987 had moved his bed downstairs and never gone back up. Ideni's throat did the thing it did when she was tired. She asked what had happened in '87. Cressida looked at her a long moment. Something in the older woman's face, not warmth exactly. Recognition, the look one hard-used woman gives another. That was not her story to tell, Cressida said. But if Ideni found herself asking it, she should keep asking. Bertram had left the answers where they could be found. He had been particular about that. She handed Ideni the bag. The register said plainly $22 in change. Cressida glanced at it, then at Ideni's sweater. $14.60, she said. Move along. There was a line. Ideni counted out $14.60. It was the last of her cash. She would eat what she'd bought and Copper would eat, and the rest was Bertram's pantry and whatever the farm decided to give up. At the door, she turned back and thanked the older woman. Cressida did not look up, but she said to the woman she was ringing up next, in a voice loud enough to be heard across the store, that girl staying up at Amberleaf, that was Merrill Ridgway's daughter. Bertram had picked her a long time ago, and Bertram was not wrong about people. If any of them had anything Bertram might have wanted returned, and they knew what she meant, they'd best bring it up there before the cold came. The store went quiet. Ideni stepped out into the October light. She did not know what she had just been given, but she knew in her body that something had shifted, that in the last 2 minutes in a general store with fluorescent lights and a smell of cardboard, a door had opened somewhere she had not yet seen. Back at Amberleaf, she put the groceries away. She fed Copper on the porch. He ate, he sat. The notch in his left ear, the milky left eye, the gray muzzle. He watched the driveway. She stood in the kitchen looking at the ceiling for a long while. The question Cressida had left in her mouth was working its way down into her chest. A man born on that farm slept 50 years in the upstairs bedroom. Then one October in '87, he moved his bed downstairs and never went back up. She climbed. The three bedrooms at the top of the stairs she found were not locked. She had been mistaken the night before, or the locks had chosen at least this morning to open. Two rooms held nothing but stripped beds and old dust. The third, the one at the end of the hall, was where Bertram had evidently slept for the first 50 years of his life, and no longer. The bed was still made, a quilt in a pattern of interlocking circles gone soft with washing. On the nightstand, an alarm clock stopped at 3:47. Morning or afternoon, she could not tell. At the end of the hallway was the narrow door she tried the night before. She tried it now. It opened. Behind it, a set of stairs, steep and unlit, rising into an attic that smelled of pine and mothballs and thyme. She got a lantern. She climbed. The attic ran the length of the house. Boxes, a dressmaker's dummy without arms, a rocking chair on its side, a trunk with the leather straps gone brittle. In a path she saw it in the lantern light, a faint disturbance in the dust that led toward the far wall. She followed the path. Behind a stack of wooden crates, a desk. The desk of a man who had used it. The chair pushed back at an angle. A pen still in a groove. A green-shaded lamp with a fringed shade Meryl's mother would have recognized. In the bottom drawer, a book, leather-bound, green. The color the ledger books used to be back when accounting was a craft. On the spine in gold that had gone dark, 3 lines. B. Ridgway, Amberleaf, 1987. Idoni set the lantern on the desk. She opened the book. The first pages were what she had expected. Weather, feed prices, a calf that had come breech in April, the May planting, a neighbor's tractor that had thrown a rod. Ordinary, ordinary, ordinary. Then October, then a change in the handwriting. Small, but she saw it. October 14th, they came asking again, 3 of them, from Chattanooga this time, not Nashville, told them there was nothing here, told them a third time, they will come a fourth. October 19th, heard the trucks past midnight, boots on the gravel, did not go out. Loaded the shotgun, did not use it. When I checked at first light, the barn door was open. October 27th, wife scared, sleeping poorly, says the knocking again. I told her what I told her. October 30th, if men respect nothing else, they respect fear. What locks cannot hold fear can. God forgive me. November 2nd, started tonight. First bell, first pulley, first thump. Idoni read that page 3 times. She turned another. The entries kept going. Diagrams, careful technical diagrams. A pulley system in the north wall. A weighted counterbalance under the upstairs floor. A wire, she could see it sketched in 3 neat lines running from the stable bell to a mechanism under the porch. Times of night. Which sound to make. When. He had built it. He had built the haunting. By hand. Alone. In November of 1987. Idoni felt her heart do a small, painful thing. Because this was a man who had loved his farm enough to be called mad by his own town, and the madness had been a shield. What locks cannot hold fear can. He had chosen to be feared instead of taken. She turned another page. At the top, a single line in a different hand, a rounder hand, softer, a woman's hand. Thank you for the room. Ida. Idoni stared at it. Ida. She did not know an Ida. She turned the page. The next entries were Bertram's again. Ordinary. December feeding. A cold snap. She turned back to the Ida line. She touched it. The ink was old. Real. It had bled into the page's fiber the way ink does when the paper has held it a long time. She marked the page with a slip of paper. She would remember the name. She carried the journal downstairs. She set it on the oak table. She stood at the window looking at Copper, who was in the day's long light asleep. Now on the porch boards, one paw over his notched left ear, as if to muffle a sound only he still heard. The house was quiet. She poured herself water from the pump. She drank it standing. That was when the floor cracked. It happened all at once. A single sharp report, like a gunshot indoors, like ice, giving way from the floorboards under the oak table. Idoni jumped. Copper's head came up on the porch. She stared at the floor. One of the boards, a wide old-growth heart pine plank, had split lengthwise. Where it had split, it had also lifted slightly at one end, as if pushed from below. She waited. Nothing else happened. She knelt. The split board had come up 2 inches from its neighbor. Under it, she could just see in the low afternoon light a darkness, a hollow. She put her fingers in the gap. The board came up in her hand with the low sigh of something that had been waiting for permission. Beneath an iron ring, set into a second board. And around the ring, cut so cleanly you would not have seen it unless the split had shown you the outline of a door. A trap door. Under the kitchen floor of Amberley Farm, Idoni sat back on her heels. For a long minute she did not move, because there is a moment when you are 20 years old and homeless, and a dead uncle has left you $6 and a shield made of fear, when you understand in a way that has nothing to do with reason, that the next thing you do will divide your life into a before and an after. She stood, she got the lantern, she lit it, she pulled the iron ring. The trap door came up, heavy, hinged on the far side. It groaned once, then stayed open where she lifted it. Beneath stone steps, cut steps, down into the foundation of a house she now technically owned. The air that rose from below was cold, cold and dry, the cold of a place that had been sealed. Idoni could smell paper, old leather, machine oil, iron. Copper on the porch whined for the first time. Just once. She descended. 10 steps. 12. A narrow stone passage opened to her right, lined with pipes and wires and old cables running toward. She raised the lantern pulleys. Small brass pulleys fixed to the joists, threaded with wire that ran off in different directions. Toward the upstairs, toward the stable, toward the porch. Bertram's system. She touched one wire gently with a fingertip. Somewhere above her, somewhere at the far end of the passage, out beyond the wall, the stable bell rang. Once, small, iron, familiar. Her hand jerked back. She understood. The thumps, the bell, the footsteps upstairs. Every ghostly sound this town had feared for 30 years. Every reason no man in a suit had ever gotten past the driveway. After dark was a system of pulleys and counterweights and wire laid by one stubborn man in November of 1987 to keep men in trucks from coming back a fourth time. Bertram Ridgway had not been mad. He had been a fortress. At the end of the passage, a heavy wooden door. Oak, studded, old. In the center, a plate of tarnished brass. And on the plate, engraved in a hand she now recognized for Idoni. She stopped. She stared. He had known she was coming. Not last week, not last month. Long enough ago to have had a plate engraved. She put her hand on the door. It was warm, warmer than the passage. Some slow heat rising from within or from the earth or from a lifetime of held breath. The door was not locked. She pushed it open. The lantern light spilled forward into a room. And Idoni Ridgway, 20 years old. $6 poorer than she had been that morning. A homeless nursing school dropout with a plastic bag from a store that had closed in 2019 stopped. Because the room in front of her was full of shelves. Shelves from floor to ceiling, along every wall, cardboard boxes, wooden trunks, bound bundles of letters tied in faded ribbon, glass cases with military medals set in blue velvet. A folded American flag in a triangular wooden case, the stars in perfect white on their blue field. The cotton yellowed the way cotton yellows when it has been folded and unfolded reverently over many years. A Bible on a stand, the leather gone black, the pages edged in gold gone dark. Photographs on the walls in old wooden frames, frame after frame after frame. And in the middle of the room, on a small oak table, a single sealed envelope with her name in Bertram's hand. Idony did not move for a long moment because the room was too much. It was too much to be a coincidence, and too much to be a fortune, and too much to be a gift. It was a life, not Bertram's alone, many lives, held. She set the lantern on the table. She sat on the low stool beside it. Someone had left a stool. Bertram had left her a stool. She picked up the envelope. She broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of good paper. Handwriting, neat, small black ink. Dear Idony, if you have found this room, then I was right about you. Most people walk into an old house and ask what it is worth. You walked in and asked what happened here. That is the difference. Do not be afraid of what your family will say about this place. They have said it for 50 years, and they were wrong. I did not keep Amberleaf because I could not sell it. I kept it because there were things here I would not let vanish. What locks cannot hold, love can, if love is stubborn enough. I have been stubborn enough for now, but I am tired and my time is running out. I have been keeping since I was 17 years old. So did my father before me since he was 15. What you see in this room is only the first shelf of a much longer wall. There is a second room. It is not in this house. When you are ready for the truth, start where the horses used to sleep. Do not sell. Do not walk away. Do not let anyone in a suit tell you what $6 is worth. I chose you for a reason. When you are ready, you will remember it. Your uncle, Bertram Ridgway. Idony read it. Then she read it again. Then she set it carefully on the table because her hand had started to shake and she did not want to shake the letter. Under the letter, weighted down by it, she saw now a second brass key, smaller, newer than the first, and beneath the key, a photograph. She lifted it. It showed Bertram Ridgway, no jacket sleeves rolled, standing in front of the stable. He was maybe 40 in it. His hand rested on the stable's siding, the way it had rested on the barns in the photograph on the mantel. On the back of the photograph, in his spidered hand, one line. When you are ready for the truth, start where the horses used to sleep. Idony held the photograph a long time because she was not right now ready for the truth. She was ready for the surface of it. She was ready for the shape of it. She was not ready for the weight of a stranger's hand on hers across 40 years of choice. She set the photograph down. She turned back to the shelves. She began slowly to read the labels. Pickens, 1950-1953, a shoebox, bound tight with twine. She did not open it. Draycott, 1962. Barnhill, Korea, returned 1953. Hollenbeck, Winter, 1978. She stopped. Hollenbeck. She thought of the man in the suit at Miller's Diner, silver at the temples. Cyrus Hollenbeck, Silver Pine Holdings, out of Chattanooga. She reached for the box on the shelf. Then she stopped. Not yet. She turned back to the journal she had left on the oak table upstairs. She thought with the kind of certainty that comes only in the deep places of the lines she had marked. Thank you for the room, Ida. She whispered the name aloud once into the underground room where a dead man had kept 50 years of the town's mislaid memory. Ida, and Copper up above on the porch barked. Once, sharp, then silent. She rose, she climbed the stone steps. She lowered the trap door but did not close it. She left the split board leaning against the table leg. She went to the front door. Copper was on his feet, facing the driveway, his good eye toward the gate. Down at the bottom of the long gravel drive, a mile off, maybe more, a set of headlights had turned in, slowly, deliberately. Not Cyrus's car, not Palmer's, just a truck, an old truck, pulling a boat trailer with no boat. The truck came halfway up the drive. Then it stopped, sat there, engine idling, for 30 seconds. Then it turned around slowly in the wide part of the drive by the barn and drove away. Copper watched until the taillights vanished behind the bridge. Then he turned, slowly, and for the first time, he crossed the porch to the front door. He stopped at the threshold. He looked up at Idney. She stepped aside. He walked in. His nails clicked on the oak floor. He went without hesitation to the wood stove. He lay down on the braided rag rug in front of it, the rug shaped exactly like a dog who had shaped it over years, and put his gray muzzle on his paws, the notch in his left ear, the milky left eye, exactly as he had been. His one good eye watched her, waiting. Now let me stop here a moment because this is where the shape of things starts to matter. Let that sit. 20 years old, $6, a homeless nursing school dropout in a dead man's kitchen with a trapdoor open under the floor and a wall of the towns kept things down below. A dog she named Copper because his coat had no red in it. A ghost story that turned out to be a fortress a man built alone in November of 1987 to keep his life from being taken. A truck that came halfway up the driveway at dusk and then without a word turned around. She did not know it yet. But Bertram Ridgway had spent 40 years routing every one of these hours toward this exact October night. He had chosen her a girl he had met once one summer she could not clearly remember when she was 8 years old. He had watched her from a distance for 12 years. He had left instructions in a hand she had only just learned to recognize. And in a shoebox on a shelf beneath her feet marked Hollenbeck Winter, 1978, in Bertram's spidered hand was a photograph of a woman with her arm in a plaster cast, standing on this very porch with a 10-year-old boy behind her, whose small hand was gripping the fabric of his mother's coat, as if he were afraid even then of being lost. The woman had signed a guest book in her careful round hand on the day she and the boy had left. "Thank you for the room." Ida. Idoni had not yet opened the box. She had not yet asked the boy's name, but she had already, without knowing, said the woman's, and that, as Bertram had known for 18 years, would be enough. She closed the journal gently. She set it on the table. She looked at Copper. His tail moved. Once. Outside, the October wind rose in the maples for the first time all evening. Somewhere out past the barn, the stable bell with no hand and no wire pulling. It now rang faintly, a single small iron ring, as if the house itself were exhaling. Idoni did not flinch. She had $6. She had a dog. She had 280 acres of a Tennessee that had, for the first time in her life, said her name aloud. She had a room under her feet full of a town's mislaid people. And somewhere beyond the reach of tonight's lantern light, she had a boy she had not yet met, and a mother named Ida, and 40 years of ledgers she had not yet found, and a woman whose name she did not yet know, and a Korean War soldier who had written his last letter home in July of 1953 from a hill everyone would forget the name of, and a 14-year-old girl doing her homework at a kitchen table in Hollow Fork, with a grandfather who had not yet decided to drive up the mountain in the morning. She had all of that. She had, in short, a life. For the first time in 6 months. She lay down on the braided rag rug beside Copper, pulled the cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and slept. Somewhere deep in the house, a lock she could not see turned itself once click and settled. She woke before the light. Copper had lifted his head from his paws and was watching the front door. Not tense, not alarmed, just watching. The way a dog watches for something he knows is coming. Idoni sat up on the rag rug. Her back hurt. Her mother's cardigan smelled like wood stove, now not car seat. That was a change. She counted it. The window over the sink was the color of pond ice. Somewhere out past the barn, a rooster she hadn't yet located announced that October in Tennessee did not in fact require permission to begin. She made coffee on the wood stove with what she found in Bertram's tin. She drank it black because she had no milk. She fed Copper the last of yesterday's tin and watched him eat with the same slow chewing of a dog who had learned at some point in his life that hurrying was how you lost a tooth. The second brass key sat on the oak table where she had left it, next to the journal, next to the photograph. Start where the horses used to sleep. She pulled on her boots. She put the key in her pocket. She whistled softly once, a woman who had until 3 days ago never owned a dog, and Copper rose without hurry and followed her out into the blue morning. The stable stood 100 yards back from the farmhouse, half swallowed by maples that had begun in the last week to go the color of copper cookware. The door was heavy. It stuck. She put her shoulder to it and it gave with a long, low complaint, the way old barnwood complains when you ask it to remember what a door is for. Inside, the smell of hay that had been hay in another decade. The smell of leather that had been leather in another life. Moats hung in the shafts of light like slow snow. 6 stalls down the left side, 6 down the right. Every stall empty, every stall dry. She walked down the aisle slowly, because a place that has held living things carries a weight even after the living things have gone, and she wanted to walk through it the way you walk through a cemetery on a first visit. Slowly, with apology. The last stall on the right had a feed trough of old bent tin. Behind the trough, the plank wall of the stable met the earth. She looked at it. She looked at the second brass key in her palm. She looked at the wall. She reached behind the trough. Her fingertips found metal. A small iron lock, set flush, barely raised from the wood. The kind of lock a man puts in when he does not want a lock to look like a lock. The key turned as if it had been waiting. The panel, a section of plank about 2 feet by 4, swung inward on hinges that had been oiled recently. Recently by whose hand she did not yet know, but recently. She lifted the lantern. The room behind the wall was smaller than the one under the farmhouse, perhaps 12 feet by 15. Dry. The floor of pounded earth that had been swept. The walls had been fitted at some point with wide pine planks, and on the planks photographs, hundreds of them. They covered every wall from about waist height to just over her head, so densely you could not have slid a playing card between them. Not framed, just pinned. Small tacks. Careful. Every photograph had beneath it a strip of paper about the width of Idney's thumb, on which someone Bertram, that hand she now knew, had written a name and a year. She stepped inside. Along the base of the north wall, a bench. And on the bench, in a neat row, 40 green leather ledgers, small hand-sized, their spines lined up like a set of teeth. She counted them because her body needed to. 40. She read the years off the spines in order. 1985, 1986, 1987, all the way to 2025. She stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly once, because it was too much to take in facing forward. The photographs did not shout. They did not glamorize. They were the small, honest photographs of ordinary lives. A young couple on a wedding day standing in front of a car that looked new in 1961. A man in coveralls at a plow horse, sun in his eyes. A woman with 3 children on a porch. The porch, a porch that no longer existed anywhere in Tennessee. A boy holding up a fish with an expression of pure disbelief that he had in fact caught it. A soldier before he went. A soldier after he came back. A soldier who had not come back at all. Idoni's throat did the thing it did when she was tired. Because these were not the photographs of famous people, and the ones of them who were dead had died the way most people die, quietly in Tennessee, with a family around them, without anyone writing anything down. Except that someone had written it down. She read one strip of paper at random. Draycott R. Corn Crib Collapse, 1962. No Injuries Ledger, Volume 2, page 41. She read another. Barnhill T. Korea, returned March 1953. Ledger, Volume 1, page 6. She read a third. Hollenbeck Y. Winter, 1978. Ledger, Volume 1, page 88. Ida. Her hand went to the shelf without her thinking. She lifted the ledger marked 1985, then set it back, then took the one marked 1978, except there was no 1978. The ledgers began at 1985. The volume she was reading about, Volume 1, Volume 2, must be under the farmhouse. Downstairs, in the other room, the bigger room. She stood in the small room of pinned photographs, and she felt for the first time the shape of the thing Bertram had built. Not one archive. 2. A private one under the house, objects and letters and metals, the heavy freight of memory. And this one, the faces, as if Bertram had understood that a name written on a paper is not the same as a face looking at you across 40 years and had decided a person needed both. That was when Copper barked. Once, low, not warning, announcing. A voice from the aisle, warm, slow. The voice of a man who had spent his life explaining things to teenagers who were pretending they weren't listening. He had seen the truck out front, he told her. Had figured she'd finally found her uncle's little secret. She turned. He filled the doorway of the stable, not the stall door, the stable door. A tall man of maybe 72 in a canvas jacket that had gone the color of cattails, with hands that had done things and a face that had waited for things. His hair had gone white in the way that suggested it had been dark once. He held a hat. Frank Loomis, he introduced himself. He did not extend a hand because his hands were still holding the hat, and he had not yet decided whether to enter. He had taught American history at the high school for 38 years before they retired him and gave him a mug that said, "World's okayest teacher." He had known her uncle. Idani nodded. Frank looked past her into the small room. His eyes moved along the wall of pinned faces. Slowly. The way a man reads a page he has waited a long time to see. Then his eyes stopped. On a small wooden shadow box in the middle of the east wall, about the size of a paperback. Behind glass, a single medal, a purple ribbon, a gold profile, a heart shape mounted on white cotton. Frank Loomis did not move for a long time. Then he stepped inside. He walked to the shadow box. He stood in front of it. He set his hat gently on the bench beside the ledgers. He did not touch the glass. "Amos," he said very softly, "not to Idani, to the box." His hand went up. It hovered over the glass. It did not descend. Amos Pickens, he told the box. That had been his father. He had written his last letter home from a hill nobody remembered called Porkchop in July of 1953. He had been 22 years old. Frank had been born 4 months after he had shipped. So they had never he began and then stopped and let the sentence sit. She understood. Frank sat down on the bench. He set his hands on his knees. He did not cry, but his face did the work of a man who was not going to cry in front of a young woman on his first morning of meeting her. She had seen the same face on her mother one afternoon near the end. He had thought all of this had gone. Frank went on after a while. When Bertram had died, he had thought, well, he had thought it was over. That was what these places did. Somebody kept them alive, and then they stopped keeping them alive, and it was gone. He looked around the small stable room. He shook his head once. 50 years he had walked past this stable. He had never known. Idoni sat down at the other end of the bench. Not close, but present. She asked if he had known Uncle Bertram well. Frank made a small sound, not a laugh, something in the same neighborhood. Since they were 9, he told her. They had fished the whitethorn together the summer of '62. Bertram had been a stubborn boy, then a stubborn man, then, well, a stubborn, dying man. But he had been, and here Frank looked again at the box on the wall. He had been the kind of person who noticed. That was rare, ma'am. That was real rare. Most people, if they noticed a thing, filed it. Bertram noticed a thing and he kept it. He stood then slowly and put his hat back on. He did not want to be in her way this morning, he said. He had only come because Cressida had said she'd bought dog food and was staying, and he thought, well, he thought she might need somebody who could tell her what she had inherited before somebody else told her what she didn't. Idani rose too. She asked him to stay. He looked at her a long moment. Then he nodded once and took the hat back off. The morning went. Frank walked the wall of photographs, slowly reading the strips of paper telling her things she could not have known this boy's grandfather had taught at the high school. This woman had run the post office through both her husbands. This man had been the last farrier in 3 counties and had shoed the mule that had pulled the church bell up the mountain in 1934. He did it not to teach her, but the way a man tells his family the stories of his family, because if he didn't, they left. She listened. She did not interrupt. Because listening and Bertram had evidently understood this about her before she had was a talent, if you were willing to call it one. At the second wall, Frank stopped in front of a photograph she had not yet looked at closely. A woman, maybe 40, standing at the corner of Amberleaf's farmhouse porch. Her right arm was in a plaster cast held tight to her chest with a sling. Her hair had come loose on one side. She was smiling the small, unpracticed smile of a woman who did not that day remember how, and behind her, half in the frame, half out, was a boy of about 10. The boy had been mostly cropped out. She could see, though, his hand, gripping the fabric of his mother's coat, the way a boy grips his mother's coat when he has learned recently that things can vanish. The strip of paper beneath said only Hollenbeck I. Winter, 1978. Ledger, Volume 1, page 88. Frank looked at it a long time. His face did a small thing. He remembered this one, he said, very quietly. She waited. I didn't gossip. He went on after a moment. Never had. But it wasn't gossip if the woman had been dead 14 years, was it? Ida Hollenbeck had come up out of Chattanooga in November of 1978. Her husband had done something to her arm that had required Doc Halston to reset it. She had a boy in the truck cab with her. She had no money. She had no people. Bertram had given her the side room in the farmhouse, and she had stayed until the arm was mended and the boy was strong enough for school. 3 months, maybe. Then she had gone. Frank didn't know where. That was Bertram. He didn't ask you what you'd done wrong. He asked you what you needed. Frank paused. He glanced at Idney. That wasn't his story to hand her before she'd eaten breakfast, he said, and he did not finish the boy's name. Idney did not press, because something in her body already knew, and knowing in the body always arrives before knowing in the mouth. She had a feeling. She let it settle. She would ask Frank the name later. The bell of a car came up the drive. They both went to the stable door. A blue pickup, 20 years old, pulled to a stop in front of the farmhouse. A girl of about 14 got out of the passenger side. She had a canvas backpack. She had scuffed sneakers. She had Idney noticed the exact careful eyes of a child raised by an older person, the eyes of a girl who had learned to watch the room before entering it. She did not close the truck door. She stood beside it. She looked at Frank, not at Idney, at Frank. Miss Bunton, she told him, had said that if she missed third period again, she didn't graduate 7th grade. Frank inclined his head. He did not seem surprised to see her. He introduced her as Nariah and told her this was Miss Ridgway. This was her farm now. Nariah's eyes moved to Idney. She studied her. She did not at any point smile. She wanted to know if Idney was going to sell it. Idney told her she wasn't. Nariah's eyes moved to the stable, to Copper on the porch, to the photograph wall visible through the stable door, back to Idney. She asked without preamble why he had written with 2 different pens on the same page. Idoni did not follow, Nariah explained. Her grandpa had said Idoni's uncle had kept books, journals. If he had been writing over a long time, he'd have used different pens. Her teacher said you could tell how long somebody had worked on a book by the ink. Frank looked at Idney. His face did the smallest smile she had yet seen on it. He shook his head once the way a man does when a child of his has said something he cannot take credit for. Nariah, he told her, loved history. She did not at present love school. School wasn't history, Nariah corrected him, closing the truck door. School was memorizing. She walked toward the stable without asking. She stopped at the door, whether she could go in. Idney stepped aside. Nariah walked past her into the small stable room. She stood in the middle. She did not touch anything. She turned slowly, taking in the walls. Her lips moved. She was reading names. She stopped at one photograph on the north wall, low down near her waist. It was a small tintype brown as tea of a man and a woman standing in front of a wagon. The strip of paper below said Draycott R. 1962, see Ledger, Volume 2, page 41. Draycott, Nariah said. She turned to Frank. Wasn't great-grandpa Draycott's people? Frank confirmed that yes on her grandmother's side. Runnels Draycott. Nariah pointed at the tintype. Frank told her that was older than Runnels. That was Runnels' own grandfather and his wife. They had lost a corn crib in 1962, and Bertram had made them alone. $200, no interest, no papers signed. Paid off, he thought about 3 years after. Neria stood very still. Then she said something Idani had not expected. Her teacher had told them Ridgeways were rich. Her teacher had said Idani's uncle had been a rich old man who kept everything for himself. That was why nobody would go on his land. Her teacher was wrong, Frank said, very quietly. Neria looked at the wall of pinned faces. She looked at the tintype of a great-great-grandfather she had not known she had. Her small, pointed face did a thing. She did not cry, but her shoulders lowered the way a person's shoulders lower when they have been carrying without knowing it, a weight that has just been set down. She would come back after school. That was all she said. She walked out. She got in the truck. She waited. Frank looked at Idani, whether she minded. She told him she didn't. He put his hat on. He hesitated at the door. He would come tomorrow, he said. Bring a couple of things. He wanted to help her, if she'd let him. She said she'd let him. He nodded. He walked out. The truck backed down the drive. Naraya watched the stable through the window until they were out of sight past the bridge. Copper on the porch sighed once as an old dog will and settled his gray muzzle back on his paws. Now let that sit, because in one October morning, in a stable that had stood empty for 50 years, a girl of 20 had inherited a wall of faces, met a man who had lost his father before he was born, and been told obliquely in the careful way small-town people tell things that a woman named Ida Hollenbeck had in the winter of 1978 arrived at Amberleaf with a plaster cast and a 10-year-old boy. Idoni did not yet know the boy's name, but she was beginning to feel the shape of a story that did not quite belong to her alone. She spent the afternoon in the small room. She took down the ledgers one at a time and looked at their opening pages. Each began with the same line in Bertram's small hand, kept for those who would otherwise vanish. She did not read the entries, not yet. She was still in her body on the surface of things. She was on the third ledger when Copper barked. Not the announcing bark, the other one, the lower one. The bark he had made when the truck had turned around in the drive at dusk the day before. She went to the stable door. A gray sedan was coming up the gravel, slowly, as if the driver was making sure of what he saw. Palmer Whitcomb's car. She recognized the way he braked. Twice too many taps. He got out. He stood beside the car. He did not come up to the house. Idani walked down. Palmer had this morning added a wool topcoat to the suit and a scarf, which was funny because it was 58 degrees. He greeted her as cousin. She returned with Mr. Whitcomb. Please, he said. Palmer. His smile came out. His hand came out. She did not take it. He returned it to his coat pocket without commenting on it. I wanted to come inside, he told her. There was something he felt he should tell her, as family. She thought about it, because a man who says as family the way he had just said it is a man who has been rehearsing the phrase. He could say it out here, she told him. He glanced up at the porch, at Copper who had risen, who was watching, then at her. All right, he agreed. He put his hands into his coat pockets. He took a small step back. He had been going through Uncle Bertram's earlier papers, his prior wills. There was a matter he had not raised Friday, because Friday had been for the family. But she should know. She waited. Uncle Bertram Palmer went on had changed his will 3 times. That was uncommon. Once in 1990, the year her mother had married. He had cut Merrill out entirely at that time. Nobody had known why. There was some suggestion he had not cared for her husband, but Uncle Bertram had not as a rule involved himself in the marital choices of his relations, and Merrill's father had died the previous year and could not intervene. Then Uncle Bertram had amended the will again in 2006, the year she had been born, and a third time in 2014, the summer as Palmer recalled that Merrill had brought her up here. Idoni did not move, because she did not at this moment want him to know that anything he said had landed. She said she didn't remember it. Palmer reminded her she had been 8. She said again that she didn't remember it. Palmer's mouth did the thing it did when a witness was not saying what he wanted them to say. His point, Palmer said, was that Uncle Bertram had in the last 20 years of his life formed a very intense attachment to a child he had barely met. A child. He wasn't saying this to hurt her, that was not healthy. That was the behavior of a lonely, unwell man. He had consulted with two colleagues in Knoxville about a challenge to the will on grounds of testamentary capacity. She stopped him. Just one word. He stopped. She said it quietly. She did not at any point raise her voice. She wanted to say something, and she wanted him to hear it. She asked how long he had been Uncle Bertram's lawyer. 22 years, Palmer said. And in 22 years, she went on, at no point had he told him he was unwell. That would have been, Palmer began and stumbled. That would have been outside the scope of his rights, she cut in. So today, on the third day of her ownership of this farm, he had arrived at the driveway to tell her with a great deal of concern for her well-being that a man he had found competent for 22 years was in fact incompetent for at least 18 of them. Did he hear how that sounded? Palmer's face did a slow flush. It was the flush of a man who had, in the practicing of his speech, not accounted for the possibility of being interrupted. He took a breath. He tried again. She gave him credit for it, a professional. He had brought something with him. He wanted her to look at it. Not now, when she was calm, when she had had a chance to sleep on it. He withdrew from his inner coat pocket a folded document. He held it out. She did not take it. He placed it on the roof of his sedan. A revised offer from Silver Pine Holdings. $520,000. Cash. 10-day close. No contingencies. And a supplemental fund of $40,000 in personal effects for her personally to allow her to move somewhere safe. She looked at him a long moment. Cyrus Hollenbeck, she said. Silver Pine Holdings. Palmer smoothed the document on the roof of the car unnecessarily. Cyrus was a shrewd man, he told, but he was a fair one. His people had been patient, but they would not be patient forever. She said nothing. Palmer, encouraged perhaps by her silence, went on. Between them, as family. Uncle Bertram hadn't been well toward the end. There were people in this town who would tell her stories about him, about the noises, about the ghost. That was a man declining. That was a mind coming apart, and he would not want to see his mistakes become hers. Copper made a sound at that. Not a bark, a single low note in the back of his throat that Idany had not previously heard him make. Palmer glanced at the dog. He did not comment on the dog. She looked at Palmer Whitcomb a long moment. Then she said quietly that he had said Uncle Bertram was his client for 22 years. Yes, and Cyrus Hollenbeck. Palmer's eyes went to the document on the roof of the car. They came back. Cyrus, he said, was a business associate of the firm's. Silver Pine was his client, she pointed out. Silver Pine, Palmer corrected, was one of many. She rephrased. He represented the man who had been buying her uncle for 22 years. That was a Palmer began. That was not how these arrangements. He represented both sides, she finished for him. He stopped. There is a small, specific expression that comes over the face of a Southern lawyer when a 20-year-old girl in a patch cardigan has, just without raising her voice, identified a professional conflict of interest that could, if she chose to file, cost him his license. It is the expression of a man realizing that the cardigan does not tell you what is inside it. Palmer picked the document up off the car roof. He folded it. He put it back in his coat. He hoped she'd think about the offer. She had, she told him. He asked her to reconsider. She said no. 4 words in a row exchanged between them. She would remember the count. She was learning to count. Palmer opened his car door. He got in. He shut it too gently. He drove away too slowly. Copper watched the driveway until the taillights were past the bridge. Then he looked at Idany. His tail moved. Once. She sat down on the porch step because her legs at last had decided to shake. If you've been with me this far, don't leave. Because what she finds next is the reason Bertram spent 40 years pretending his farm was haunted. She spent the rest of that afternoon with a bucket of lime and a bucket of sand and a bucket of water on the kitchen wall by the window over the sink. because a crack had opened in the plaster the size of a grown man's thumb, and Bertram's journals had told her in his hand, in an entry from March of 1982, that the ratio for patching was 1 to 3 lime to sand wet, only enough to hold. She did it wrong the first time. She used too much water. The mix ran down the wall like porridge. She stood there with a trowel in her hand and lime on her wrist, and she almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because if she didn't laugh, she was going to sit down on the kitchen floor and cry, and she was not this afternoon willing to cry. She scraped it off. She made the mix again. Drier. She pushed it into the crack with the flat of the trowel. She held it. She let it set. Copper watched from the rug. She told him he could help if he wanted. He looked at her. She told him, yeah, she hadn't thought so. She got the second bucket done. She washed her hands at the pump. That was when the second truck came. Frank's truck. Nariah in the passenger seat this time as well, but Frank at the wheel. He got out. He held up a hand, half wave, half apology. Nariah had won the argument, he told her. Nariah from the passenger side corrected she had lost the argument. She had Idony notice changed out of her school clothes into old jeans. She had a spiral notebook in one hand and a pencil behind each ear like she was daring the world to comment. Idony looked at Frank. Frank looked at Idony. Neither of them, she saw, was going to be the one who suggested that a 14-year-old girl should not be doing history homework in a haunted stable on a Monday afternoon. Come in, Idony told them. Nariah went, not to the stable this time, to the room under the house. Idony had not yet decided who she was going to show it to. Then Nariah, who had been given permission for exactly the wrong room, took a lantern off the peg in the kitchen without asking. Lit it, went to the trap door and climbed down as if she had been going down the same stone steps every afternoon after school her entire life. Idony followed. Frank stood at the top of the trap door with his hat in his hand and did not descend. That was her uncle's business, he told her. He'd wait. She asked if he had known it was down there. He had suspected. That wasn't the same as knowing. He had been raised in some things not to suspect out loud. She left him at the top. Down below, Nariah stood in the middle of the room and did not move. Her lips were parted. Her spiral notebook at her side went slack in her hand. She turned to Idony. Her eyes were wet. She did not herself seem to know they were wet. There were people down here, she said. Idony agreed. They weren't dead, Nariah added. Some of them were, Idony corrected gently. Not the way her mother was dead, Nariah said. Not looking at anyone, just to the shelves. Nariah's mother had died in childbirth. Frank had told Idony in the stable in 5 words. She had held the 5 words all afternoon. No, Idony said. They were not dead like that. Nariah walked slowly along the shelves. She stopped at the box she had upstairs in the small room scene referenced. Dray cot. She did not open it. She put her hand on the outside of it. She left her hand there a long moment. Then she said without turning, that if Idony sold the farm, she knew Grandpa had said Idony had said she wouldn't. But if she did, whether he and she meant her great-great-grandfather in a tintype photograph would be gone. Like, all the way gone. Idony crossed the room. She did not touch Nariah. She only stood beside her. He wouldn't be gone, but there would be nowhere for anyone to find him. Nariah's shoulders did that thing they had done in the stable that morning. The lowering, the weight setting down. Okay, that was all she said. But it was the okay of a 14-year-old girl deciding right then that 7th grade 3rd period was in fact worth passing. They came up out of the room a while later. Frank was in the kitchen. He had put on coffee. He had also, without asking, cleaned the trowel Idony had left in the bucket of lime water. He held it up as she came up the last stone step. He didn't like to see good tools left to rust. Yes, sir. She agreed. Nariah went to the wood stove. She sat on the rag rug next to Copper. Copper permitted it. He put his gray muzzle on her knee. He closed his one good eye. Frank looked at Idony. He set down the trowel. There was a story he owed her, he said, about her uncle, about November of 1987. He had been thinking about it since he had seen the ledger years on her bench. But it wasn't a story for a first afternoon, And it was not he thought a story to tell in a room full of everybody's grandfathers. So he'd tell her tomorrow, out on the porch, just the two of them. She agreed. And he would say one thing today, he added, and he would say it in front of Nariah because she should hear it. Her uncle Bertram, he told them both had been called a lot of things in this county over 50 years. He had been called stubborn. He had been called strange. He had been called more than once a mean old miser. Frank had let people say it because Bertram had wanted them to say it, and Frank had not at the time understood why. Nariah looked up from Copper's muzzle. She was listening. He hadn't been any of those things Frank went on. He had been a man building a wall around something he loved. And walls took stones, and stones looked like meanness from a distance. That was all he had today. That was all he had earned the right to say today. He put the coffee down without drinking it. He put his hand on Nariah's head. He walked out onto the porch. He stood at the porch rail looking east. The light was going. The maples had gone from copper to blood. Nariah stayed with Copper. Idoni stood in her kitchen with a patched crack in the plaster and a trap door still open in her floor and a wall full of Tennessee under her feet. Now here is where I want you to picture this. Because outside a mile down the gravel road on the other side of Whitethorn Creek, in the front seat of a black Mercedes that had turned off the paved road 10 minutes ago and stopped just short of the driveway, Cyrus Hollenbeck sat looking at the smoke rising from Idoni Ridgway's chimney and did the math a man like Cyrus Hollenbeck does when a young woman has just refused for the second time an amount of money she should have taken. He did not come up. Not that evening. He would come tomorrow. But he made a phone call from that seat to a man in Knoxville who owed him a favor about a county road easement, about a right-of-way, about whose road went where and who could close it. Then he made a second call to Palmer Whitcomb. Idoni did not know about the calls. Not yet. She would learn about them tomorrow when the man who had smiled and called her worthless would arrive with the smile put away and would explain to her in a voice like polished stone that there was one road onto Amberleaf and one road off, and both of them as of Monday next would belong to him. But that was tomorrow. Tonight Frank stood on the porch and looked east, and Nariah slept briefly with her cheek on Copper's shoulder, and Idoni went back down into the room under the farmhouse with a lantern and a fresh notebook. And she took down the first ledger of the 40 green leather ledgers, and she opened it to page 1, and she read in her uncle's small hand, "Kept for those who would otherwise vanish. Volume 1, 1985 to 1990. She began to read the list of names. She read for 2 hours. She did not skip. She did not skim. She read her way through the years the way a stubborn woman reads her way through a life, one name at a time, one debt at a time, one small saved thing at a time. She read about a family whose son had come home from Beirut with something wrong in him he could not name, and who had borrowed the north pasture for 2 summers to grow squash so he'd have work for his hands. She read about a widow who had borrowed $40 to fix a roof and had paid it back in jars of preserves for 3 years running. She read about a Draycott corn crib collapsing in 1962 and being rebuilt in 1963 by 6 men who had between them 1 truck. She read about a young man who had gone into the mines outside Kingsport in '79 and come back after 8 months to find his wife had run off with a cousin, and how Bertram had taken him on for a summer of pasture work and paid him in cash and coffee, and had told him at the end of it that a wife who leaves for a cousin was not a wife worth chasing. She read until her eyes did not focus. At the top of the 3rd year, 1988, she stopped. Because there in Bertram's small hand in an entry that was not about anyone else but about him. His niece Merrill had married a man that spring. Not the man Bertram would have chosen, but Merrill was a grown woman and had chosen him. And Bertram was not on principle in the business of correcting the marriages of his relations. 2 years later, though, Merrill and her husband had come up to Amberleaf for a Christmas that Merrill had wanted and her husband had endured, and Bertram had watched the husband count the acreage from the porch with his eyes the way a man counts money. That was when Bertram had changed the will, not the year of the wedding, 2 years in. And here in the ledger for 1990, in an entry Idany read 3 times, because her hands had gone still on the page, Bertram had written it out plain. His niece Meryl had married a man who would, in his judgment, spend the rest of her life persuading her to sell things she did not want to sell. If she had a child, he would provide for that child. Not through Meryl. Meryl could not be trusted to keep what she was given. She loved the man. That was not a criticism of Meryl. It was a description of love. Idony read the paragraph twice, then a third time. She thought about the sweater on her shoulders, the one with the flannel patch. Meryl's sweater. Meryl, who had, in the last 2 years of her life, sold her wedding ring to pay for a treatment that had not worked, and had signed the deed to a house Idany did not know she'd owned, over to a man who had 3 months later disappeared. Meryl, who had in her last week held Idany's hand and whispered, Idany had not at the time understood that she hoped Uncle Bert had not forgotten her baby. He had been the one who saw us. Bertram had not forgotten. He had, in fact, in 1990, in a green leather ledger under a stable that did not yet exist as an archive, made a promise to a niece he could not save about a girl who had not yet been born. Idany closed the ledger. She rested her hand on it. Upstairs in the kitchen, Frank had left. Nariah had gone with him. Copper was on the rag rug, asleep, the notch in his left ear, catching lamplight, the milky left eye, closed the gray muzzle, steady with breath. Idony climbed the stone steps. She lowered the trap door. She did not close it. She could not yet close what he had spent 40 years opening for her. She sat down at the oak table with the journal from 1987 open in front of her, and the ledger from 1990, and the letter from Bertram, and the second brass key. She whispered into the room that had not been empty for 50 years that she knew what he was doing, Uncle Bert. The house did not answer. But somewhere far off, one iron bell with no wind, no wire, no hand rang. Just once, as if to say good. She slept that night on the couch again. Copper on the rug, the trap door not closed, the kitchen crack drying to a hairline, the 40 ledgers waiting. Tomorrow Cyrus Hollenbeck would arrive with a smile put away in a road he did not yet own. Tomorrow Frank would sit on the porch and tell her about November of 1987 and a woman named Rilla who had not been able to bear the noises her husband had built. Tomorrow Nariah would come after school in old jeans and a pencil behind each ear, and would sit at the oak table and copy names from a ledger into a spiral notebook, because a 14-year-old girl had decided that 7th grade third period was in fact worth passing. Tomorrow rain would come, and a roof would leak, and 3 letters from 1943 would run. Tomorrow. But that night in a farmhouse the town had feared for 30 years, the girl in the patch cardigan slept with an old dog beside her, and a wall of the town's mislaid people under her. And she did not, for the first time in 6 months, dream of anything at all. The house held her. Bertram Ridgway had, in the last stubborn thing he did, made sure of that. If you've been with me this far, don't leave. Because what Bertram Ridgway routed across 40 years was not for Idany alone. It was for a town that never knew it had been saved. The rain came just before dawn on Tuesday. Idony woke to the sound of it on the tin porch roof. Steady, not gentle. The kind of rain that October in Tennessee sometimes gives you as a warning in case you were considering trusting it. Copper was already on his feet watching the front window. The stable was a gray blur in the wet. She swung her legs off the couch. She listened. Because underneath the rain, underneath the tin drum, and the wind in the maples, there was another sound. Softer, closer, from below. Drip. She was on her feet. The trap door was not fully closed. She had known she had not closed it. She lifted it. She climbed down 2 steps. The lantern on the wall was out. She reached up and turned the wheel on the oil reservoir and struck the match with a hand that had begun to shake before she had decided to be afraid. The room below was cold, colder than yesterday. She smelled it before she saw it. Wet paper. She raised the lantern. On the 3rd shelf from the top, the shelf marked simply 1943. In Bertram's hand, a dark stain had spread across the wood. A drip fell as she watched. Then another. From the beam above. The roof of the passage that ran under the porch, where she had 3 days ago put a patch of felt and pitch over a place where the porch drainage had over years been eating through. The patch had held for 2 days. Then Cyrus Hollenbeck had made a phone call about a road easement, and Palmer Whitcomb had come with a coat too heavy for the weather, and an offer that had ended in the word Chattanooga, and Bertram Ridgway's 40-year system of held things had in a night of rain sprung a leak over the shelf where the letters from Amos Pickens had been kept. That was the box. She saw the label as her lantern turned. Pickens, 1950 to 1953. Idoni did not for one full second breathe. Then she moved. She took the box off the shelf with both hands. She held it out from her body the way you hold a child who has come home wet. The cardboard was soft under her fingers. She could feel where the water had gone in. Upstairs, she climbed the stone steps with the box in her arms. Copper backed away from the trap door as if he understood. She set the box on the oak table. She took the lid off. Envelopes, a stack of them. Field mail, small. The paper thin as onion skin. The address on the top envelope, Pivot Amos R. Pickens, 7th Infantry Regd. APO 7 San Francisco. Return address, Mrs. E. Pickens, RT2 Hollow Fork 10. The top 3 envelopes had darkened along one edge. The ink had bled where it had touched water. She could see on the flap of the 3rd envelope a smear that had once been Amos Pickens's own careful young handwriting. She said the same word out loud that she had said to her mother in the hospital the morning the 2nd round of chemo hadn't taken. She did not decide to say it. She got clean towels. She had 2 of them in Bertram's linen chest. She laid them out on the table. She lifted the envelopes off one by one. She placed them face up. She dabbed, slowly, the way a nurse dabs. She had in fact been trained in this. Not for letters, for skin, for a mother whose skin had at the end torn under too much washing. The tears started before she had decided to let them. They did not fall on the envelopes. She turned her head each time. She had trained herself in this too. By the 3rd towel she had them. All 11 envelopes, not saved, but not lost. 3 of them had run beyond reading in some places. 8 were legible. One, the last she saw as she lifted it, was still sealed. Never opened. Postmarked July 11, 1953. She held the sealed envelope in her hand. She thought about Frank sitting in the stable yesterday with his hat on the bench beside the ledgers. He wrote his last letter home from a hill nobody remembers. Frank had never read it, because his mother had died before Frank had been old enough to be told what was inside, because the letter had been kept unopened by a mother who could not bear to read her son's last words, and then had passed unopened to Bertram, who had understood that some things are not to be opened by the person who kept them. She placed the sealed envelope on the driest towel. She would not open it either. Frank would. Then she sat down at the oak table in the gray light of a rain morning in the kitchen of a farmhouse she did not until Friday know she owned, and she put her face in her hands and cried the way she had not cried since her mother had died. She cried because she had almost failed. Bertram had kept these envelopes for 40 years, and she had in 3 days almost lost them. She cried because a young man named Amos had written a letter home in July of 1953 from a hill nobody remembered and had not come home, and had died believing his last words to his young pregnant wife would someday be read. She cried because her mother had held her hand in a hospital and whispered that she hoped Uncle Bert hadn't forgotten her, and Bertram had not, and Merrill had never known. She cried until Copper crossed the kitchen and pressed his head against her knee and stayed there and did not move. By 8, the rain had eased. By 9, Frank's truck came up the drive. He came in without knocking because they were by now past knocking. He carried a thermos. He looked at her face. He did not comment. He set the thermos on the counter. He looked at the trap door. He looked at the towels on the table. Something had gotten wet, he observed. Some, she agreed. Not all. She had got most of it. He nodded slowly. And whether his was, he asked. She could not for a second speak. She only pointed at the sealed envelope on the driest towel. Frank Loomis walked to the table. He stood over it. He looked at the postmark. His hand, when it went out slowly and stopped and returned to his side. July 11, he said very quietly. That would have been 3 days before. He did not cry. He sat down at the oak table in Bertram's kitchen with a sealed letter from a father he had never met in front of him, and he did not touch it. He had waited 72 years for this letter, he told her. Another day was not going to hurt him. He wanted to open it, but he wanted to open it with his granddaughter beside him. Would she keep it here for him until Nariah got out of school? She told him. Frank nodded. Once. He stood. He looked at the rag rug where Copper had gone back to lie. He looked out the window at the rain-blurred stable. He put his hand on the back of the chair as if he needed for a moment the chair's help. There was a story about her uncle he had said he would tell her today. On the porch, just the two of them. He'd still tell it, but not right now. Right now, he was going to sit in her kitchen, and he was going to drink her coffee, and if she didn't mind, he would like to sit quiet. She didn't mind. They sat. Now let me stop here because this is what mattered. Because Frank Loomis, who had taught American history for 38 years, and who had lost a father before he had been born, and who had walked past a stable for 50 years without knowing that his father's Purple Heart hung inside it, sat at a kitchen table with a 20-year-old girl he had known for 2 days, and neither of them spoke for 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes, more was said between them than had been said in any of Palmer Whitcomb's practice speeches, or in any of Cyrus Hollenbeck's polished offers, or in any of the Pearled cousins' bright, brittle laughter in a lawyer's office on a Friday morning. Silence, when it is shared, is not silence. It is a signature. At 10 past 11, the Mercedes came up the drive. Copper stood. Frank went to the window. He looked out. He glanced at Idony. His face did the small thing it had done in the stable yesterday in front of Amos's box. He hadn't come alone. Idony looked. Cyrus Hollenbeck in the driver's seat, Palmer Whitcomb in the passenger seat, and a third man in the back, a large man with the shoulders of a bailiff or someone who had once been one. Cyrus got out. He wore today a leather jacket over a shirt with no tie, as if he had this morning dress to be listened to rather than admired. Palmer got out. He held a leather folio. The bailiff-shouldered man remained in the car. Idony opened the front door before Cyrus could knock. Cyrus smiled. Just once, just briefly, he would come to the point, he told her. She encouraged him to. Silver Pine Holdings, he said, had this morning acquired the county road access easement running from the state route to the Whitethorn Bridge. Papers signed at 7 a.m., legally, cleanly. Cousin Palmer could confirm. Palmer confirmed by not disagreeing. That easement, Cyrus went on, was the only vehicular access to Amberleaf Farm. Come Monday next, Silver Pine would close it for reconstruction. Officially for reconstruction. Practically for as long as he decided. He waited. He gave her the beat. Frankly, Miss Ridgway, he said he didn't want it to come to that. He had raised his previous offer to $650,000 with a supplemental relocation fund of $75,000 closing in 5 business days. That was the last number he would speak aloud on this porch. If she refused it, the road closed Monday morning at 6 a.m. Frank stepped up beside Idony. He said nothing. He put his hat on. He crossed his arms. Cyrus did not look at Frank. He looked at Idony. He tried something. It was very small. He had, one imagines, tried it before and it had worked. He wanted to speak plainly. He had heard the story of her mother. He was sorry for her loss. He would be sorry for her loss, even if she signed these papers today. But Cousin Palmer's word, not his, she was not well. Her judgment was not at present her own. That land was not what she thought it was. Sign. Go home. Grieve. Idony looked at him. She did not this time take her time. No. One word. She closed the door. She heard him hesitate on the porch. She heard him think about knocking again. She heard him decide against. She heard the Mercedes back down the drive slowly. She heard the tires cross the Whitethorn Bridge. She heard over the rain Copper let out a single low sound in the back of his throat. She turned to Frank. Monday morning at 6, she said. Monday morning at 6, Frank agreed. They stood in the hallway of Amberleaf Farm. Frank Loomis, retired history teacher, 72 years old, told her that it was time he told her what had happened in November of 1987. They sat on the porch, not because the porch had stopped raining, but because a wooden porch under rain has a particular privacy to it, and Frank Loomis needed the privacy. He kept his voice even. He looked out at the barn. In 1987, he began a man had come up here from Chattanooga. Not Silver Pine. Silver Pine hadn't existed then. But it was the same man's people in the same suits buying the same kind of thing. They had been called consolidated aggregates. They had wanted the limestone under the East Ridge. They had offered her uncle a fortune. He had said no. They had come back. He had said no. They had come back a third time with a lawyer and a survey crew, and they had told him if he didn't sell, they had ways of making a man sell that he wouldn't like. Bertram had been 43 that fall. He had been married 11 years to a woman Frank wanted to say something about if she'd let him. She would. Her name had been Amaryllis Ridgway. Everyone called her Rilla. She had been well. Some people were made of the softer material. That was not a criticism. That was a description. Rilla could not bear cruelty. She could not bear the world being cruel at her. Bertram had loved her the way stubborn men love soft women, which was to say entirely and without knowing how to protect what he loved. Frank paused. The rain had thinned to a mist. That fall October of '87, the men from Chattanooga had come at night. Once with a truck, once with two trucks, once with a boy on a motorcycle who had put a rock through the kitchen window. Bertram had called the sheriff. The sheriff had been 40 minutes away, and this was not gossip, irony, this was fact. The sheriff had been at that time on Consolidated Aggregates payroll. It had taken Frank until 1992 and a trip to the county clerk's office to prove it, but it was fact. Bertram on his own had decided he was not going to lose the farm to men who could pay a sheriff. He was not going to let them come up his driveway a fourth time. And he was not above all going to let his wife live in a house that men in trucks could enter at midnight. Idoni had not moved. Neither had Copper at Frank's feet. So he built the noises. Frank went on. That was November of '87. He had worked at night. He had been a good hand with wire. He had been the man they called when a threshing machine broke, so he had had the touch. He had put a pulley here, a counterweight there. He had put the bell on the stable post so it would ring at any real wind, and then had wired a second pull to it from under the porch so he could ring it on a still night. He had rigged the upstairs floor to thump when the wood stove ticked as it cooled. Genius work, Idoni. Genius. Not the work of a madman. The work of a man who had understood that if he was going to lose the sheriff, he had to gain a ghost. Idoni's eyes had not left him. She asked what happened then. Then Frank said he did it. And the men from Chattanooga had come back a fourth time, and they had turned around in the driveway just past the barn, and they had never come back a fifth. And the town, well, the town had heard the noises too, and the town being a town had made up its story. Bert Ridgway had been hearing things. Bert Ridgway had been living with ghosts. Bert Ridgway had been crazy, and Bert had let them say it. He had let them say it, ma'am, because it had been the story that kept the road empty. That was what he had traded for. Frank was quiet a long moment, but he had traded something else too. Rilla could not tell the difference. She could not tell the difference between the noise her husband made and a real noise. She had thought Idoni understood that the house was haunted, that real dead people had been walking her upstairs hallway at night. She had got thin. She had stopped sleeping. In the spring of '89, she had taken a bus to her sister's in Bristol. She had not come back. He stopped. He did not add anything. Idoni asked quietly whether he had ever told her. What he'd done. He had written her a letter, Frank said. In '94. He had mailed it for him. She had sent it back unopened. That had been Rilla. She had not been cruel. She had been, as he had said, softer material. She could not come back to a house that had cost her 4 years of sleep, even if the cost had in the end been paid for love. Frank set his coffee down. Bertram had never spoken of her again. Not once. Not to Frank, and Frank had been his closest friend on this earth. He had kept her photograph in a drawer in the desk in the attic. Frank had seen it once by accident and had kept the letter she had returned in the drawer with it. Sealed. Which had been Bertram. He would not open a letter that had been returned to him. That had not been his letter anymore. Frank looked at Idony. That was the story of 1987, ma'am. That was what the fear was. That was the cost he had paid for what she was standing in the middle of. Idony did not for a while speak. Then she said, because she had realized it while he was talking and it seemed important to say it out loud, he had never remarried. No, ma'am, he hadn't, because he had thought he deserved to lose her. Frank looked at her. His face did the small thing. Yes, ma'am. He thought that was exactly what he had thought. They sat. Copper put his gray muzzle down on Frank's boot. Frank did not move his foot. After a while, Idony asked Frank if she could show him something. Before Naraya got out of school, she needed to check something in the ledgers. She had read the first 3 volumes. There was a name she wanted to find. All right, Frank said. The name Hollenbeck. Frank looked at her. She already knew, ma'am. She wanted to be sure. She went down. She came back up. She had the ledger from 1978. She had opened it to page 88. She set it on the porch railing between them. Bertram's small hand, I, Hollenbeck, Chattanooga. Arrived 11 November with broken right radius hairline. 3 weeks old, poorly set. Male child Ayed. 10. She calls him Cy. She has $41 in a truck that will not run. I will not turn her away. Gave the side room. Set the arm again with Doc Halston Wednesday. Boy is silent but eats. He will need reading. Bought him 3 books from Nash's in town. I will not use his surname while they are here. If husband comes looking, I will say I have not seen them. I have said that before. I will say it again. Kept for those who would otherwise vanish. Frank Loomis read the page. He read it twice. He looked up at Idony. He did not need to say it. She said it herself. Cy is Cyrus. Yes, ma'am. Cy is Cyrus Hollenbeck. Frank set his coffee cup down. His hand did not shake, but only because he had trained it not to. Yes. I had been 10 years old on the porch of her uncle's house. She went on saying it slowly, the way you say something so you'll believe it. Her uncle had set his mother's arm. Her uncle had bought him 3 books, and he was now trying to close the road to her farm on Monday morning at 6 a.m., so she'd have to sell her uncle to him. Yes, Frank said. Idony said nothing for a long time. Then she asked in a voice so quiet Frank almost had to lean whether he knew. He didn't believe so, Frank said. Ida wouldn't have. That had not been Ida. Ida had left with the boy and had not spoken of that winter to any of them. She had sent her Uncle Bertram a card every year at Christmas until she had died in 2011. She had never signed the cards. Bertram would find them in the mailbox in December, no return, no signature, always in the same round hand. He had kept them. They were in a box under his house right now, Frank would guess. She would find the box that evening. There would be 33 cards. At 3:10, the school bus stopped at the end of the drive. Naraya walked up the gravel. She had this afternoon added a red bandana over her hair tied at the nape. She looked for a moment less like a 14-year-old girl and more like a small, hard tool that had learned over the summer what it was for. Frank rose from the porch chair. He put on his hat. He held the sealed envelope in his hand. He waited for her at the porch step. Naraya looked at his hand. She looked at his face, then at Idony, then back at his hand. She was for the first time in 2 days quiet. Frank sat down on the porch step. He indicated the spot beside him. Naraya sat. He did not at first hand it to her. He said without looking at her that this was a letter from her great-grandfather Amos to her great-grandmother Elva, dated July the 11th, 1953. It had been mailed from Korea. Elva had never opened it. Nobody had ever opened it. He wanted her to open it nary, because he did not think he could hold it steady, and he had never in his life read a thing out loud that he could not hold steady. Naraya took the envelope. She looked at the postmark for a long time. Then she took a pencil from behind her ear and used the flat tip to slit the flap. She unfolded the single sheet of thin paper inside. She read it. Her lips moved. She started at the top. Then she looked up. Grandpa. Yes, Neri. He was thinking about your name. She read in a voice that stayed steady because a 14-year-old girl had decided it would. Elva, my darling, if it is a boy, I want to name him after my father, Franklin. If it is a girl, name her whatever you like. Only tell her that her daddy loved her before she was born, which is more than any man can say for certain. It has been quiet here for a day, and I do not trust the quiet. If I do not come home, know that I was not afraid, only surprised. I was still surprised when I left home that a girl like you had married a boy like me. Yours until the last one, Amos. The porch went quiet. Frank did not for a long time speak. His eyes had gone somewhere the porch could not follow. Then he said very quietly that Franklin. Frank. That was how she had named him. He had never known whether she had named him after him or whether he had asked. Now he knew. Nariah folded the letter back into thirds. She folded it carefully. She did not this time cry either. She set it in her grandfather's hand. He knew me, she told him, because he named you. That means he knew me. Frank Loomis closed his hand around the letter and around his granddaughter's hand and did not speak. Idany went back inside so they could have the porch to themselves for a while. She stood in the kitchen with her forehead against the cool of the cabinet door. She thought about the ledgers. She thought about the road. She thought about Monday morning at 6 a.m. She thought about a 10-year-old boy called Cy in the side room of this house in November of 1978, being read to at the kitchen table by a stubborn man who kept the boy's surname off the ledger to protect him. She thought about the shape of the thing. Then she picked up the telephone in Bertram's kitchen, an old rotary that still worked because the line into Amberleaf had been kept, because Bertram Ridgway had apparently planned everything, and she dialed a number Frank had written on a napkin an hour earlier. The number was for a woman in Knoxville, a lawyer. Not one of Palmer's, a friend of a friend. Frank knew her because he had taught her son. Idony spoke for 11 minutes. She hung up. She stood in Bertram's kitchen with her hand on the receiver a long time. Then she went back down to the room under the house. She took from the shelf marked Hollenbeck Winter, 1978, the shoebox she had on Sunday not opened. She set it on the table. She lifted the lid. Inside a photograph she had already seen of Ida with her arm in a cast and a 10-year-old boy behind her whose small hand gripped her coat. A guest book opened on the porch by Bertram. Every night a guest arrived and signed by every guest who could sign. Ida had signed, "Thank you for the room." Ida. And below Ida's line, Bertram had let the boy sign too, a slanted, careful child script. 10 years old, not yet cursive. Cy Hollenbeck. Age 10. Thank you, Mr. Bertram. Idony held the guest book a long moment. Then she took the guest book and the photograph and a small object Bertram had also kept in the box. A receipt folded once dated November 14, 1978 from Nash & Son Hardware for 3 books total $2.85, and she wrapped them together in a piece of linen from the linen chest. She tied the linen with a length of blue ribbon she found in Bertram's desk drawer. Because she had decided standing there that when a thing was to be placed on a table, it should be placed with the reverence it deserved. She went back upstairs. She sat down at the oak table with the bundle in front of her. She waited for Wednesday. Wednesday was county day at the Hollow Fork Courthouse. Wednesday was when Palmer Whitcomb's law office received clients. Wednesday was when Cyrus Hollenbeck in town to sign the easement papers on the county road had scheduled a courtesy visit with the mayor's office. Wednesday at 10:45 in the morning. Idany Ridgway walked up the courthouse steps in her mother's blue cardigan with the flannel patch on the elbow and her mother's wedding band on the silver chain under her collar and her cracked boots on her feet. Frank Loomis at her right shoulder. Copper on a lead of clothesline at her left. Nariah, who had that morning argued her way out of first period in the back. And a woman in a gray coat and a briefcase, the lawyer from Knoxville, beside her. They asked at the desk for Palmer Whitcomb. Palmer's office door was open. Cyrus Hollenbeck was seated in the client chair. Both men looked up when the door filled with people. Palmer's face did the thing. Cyrus did not at first react. He was a man who had learned at some point that the first face is the face people remember. Idany walked in. She did not sit. She set her mother's cardigan on the arm of the second chair. She placed on Palmer's desk in silence three things. The first, a manila envelope. Inside, the woman in the gray coat set the folder on the desk beside the envelope, a formal bar complaint filed with the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility. Grounds representation of adverse parties. Silver Pine Holdings and the estate of Bertram Ridgway. Documentation attached. Filed at the office of the board that morning at 8 a.m. Palmer read the first page. His face did not do the thing this time. It did nothing. The second, the ledger from 1994 opened to a page. Frank set the ledger down. He did not say anything. He turned the ledger so Palmer could read it. The entry in Bertram's small hand Whitcomb C. $8,000 ovarian Vanderbilt referral. No interest. Told her repay when able. Woman is proud, will not accept as gift. Records held here, not to be spoken of. Son Palmer at Duke Law, not to know unless mother permits. She died February 12, 1995. Note in file she permits. Palmer Whitcomb read the entry. He read it a second time. He looked up. His mouth was open. His mother had died in February of 1995. He had been in his second year of law school at Duke. He had at the time been told by an aunt that his mother's Vanderbilt referral had been paid for through a church fund. He had believed that for 29 years. His mother had asked on her deathbed that Bertram Ridgway be sent flowers. Palmer had thought his mother meant Bertram had in her final weeks brought her a casserole. Palmer had at his mother's funeral shaken Bertram Ridgway's hand and had told him thank you for the visits, and Bertram had told him his mother had been a good woman and to take care of himself. And Palmer had walked away and grown up to represent 22 years later the corporation trying to take Bertram Ridgway's farm. The office was very quiet. Idany did not look at Palmer. She placed on the desk the third thing, the linen bundle. She untied the blue ribbon. She lifted one at a time the photograph of Ida with her arm in a cast. The guest book opened to the page with two signatures in the receipt from Nash & Son Hardware, dated November 14, 1978, for 3 books. She turned the guest book so Cyrus Hollenbeck could see the second signature. Cy Hollenbeck, age 10. Thank you, Mr. Bertram. Cyrus Hollenbeck did not move for a full 10 seconds. He looked at the child's handwriting. He looked at his own child's handwriting at 10 years old in a house he had until this moment been trying to take from a girl in a patched cardigan. He looked at the photograph. He looked at his mother, Ida Hollenbeck, winter of 1978, her arm in a plaster cast. The little boy behind her whose small hand had gripped her coat. He remembered Idany saw him, remember the smell of the side room. The 3 books, the soft voice at bedtime of a stubborn man who had used no last name. He remembered she saw the reason his mother had never taken him back to Tennessee. Cyrus Hollenbeck did not speak. He closed his eyes. Just once, just briefly. He opened them. He looked at Idany. He did not apologize, because men like Cyrus Hollenbeck do not in front of witnesses apologize. But he did something else. He stood. He picked up his coat. He picked up his hat. He walked past Palmer's desk without looking at Palmer. He stopped at the door. He did not look at Idany. He looked at the photograph of his mother on the desk. Then he said in a voice Idany had not before heard him use, he would call Knoxville that afternoon. The easement would be released. The road would remain open. Silver Pine would withdraw. That was all he said. He walked out. He did not, so far as Idany would ever know, return to Hollow Fork again. He sold his firm within the year to a group out of Charlotte. His secretary at Silver Pine would tell a friend years later that Mr. Hollenbeck had that November taken down a photograph of his mother from his office and had it moved to his home and had never again allowed anyone to schedule him for a meeting in Tennessee. Idony did not care where he went. Not then, not later. She turned to Palmer Whitcomb in his office in Hollow Fork, the ledger of 1994 open on his desk in front of him. She said very quietly that he had 30 days to withdraw the bar complaint on his own terms. Ms. Halbert here, she indicated the lawyer from Knoxville would accept a resignation from the bar in lieu of proceedings at his discretion. That was not a favor to him. That was a mercy to his mother's name. Palmer Whitcomb sat down slowly in his chair. He did not then or ever ask her whether Bertram had also kept a Christmas card of his mother's unsigned from the last year of her life. He did not then or ever ask her whether in one of the ledger's later volumes there was a note that read, Whitcomb C. feels she cannot repay in this life. I told her the debt was cleared by her raising her son. She wept. I told her the boy would be a lawyer someday and would help someone else without knowing why. He did not then or ever ask. Idony did not offer. She folded the linen, she tied the ribbon, she left Palmer Whitcomb's office with her lawyer and her retired history teacher and her granddaughter of Amos Pickens in an old border collie mix on a length of clothesline. Now let me tell you what happened after that, because I promised you a reason to stay. They went home, because Amberleaf was by then and would be forever after home. On Saturday of that week, the town came. Not because Idony had invited them, she had not. Because Cressida Draycott had that Tuesday said in the general store, in the loud voice of a woman ringing up groceries, that if any of them had anything Bertram might have wanted returned, they'd best bring it up there before the cold came. They came with pies. They came with photographs from attics. They came with a widow's bundle of love letters tied in blue string that a son had been planning to throw away. They came with an old canning jar full of arrowheads a father had collected from the East Ridge in the summer of 1948. They came with a shoebox of postcards from a mother who had traveled once in her whole life and had sent a postcard from every stop. They came with a purple heart in a velvet-lined box that a widow had kept in her nightstand for 60 years and had until Saturday never shown anyone. They came in 2s and 3s and eventually in 27s. Idony stood on the porch in her mother's cardigan, and she did not at first know what to do. Because a girl of 20 who had 7 days ago been counting $6 onto a notary's counter is not prepared to be given a town's mislaid life all at once. Frank stood beside her. She just said thank you, he told her quietly in the ear of a girl who had in a week become a person he would tell his granddaughter to trust. She just received. That was what her uncle would have done. So she did. Cressida Draycott came at midday. She carried a small enamel tin blue with white flowers of apple butter she had made in September. She set it on the porch railing without ceremony. She looked at Idony. She looked at Copper. She looked at the trap door in the kitchen visible through the open front door. Bertram, she said, in the voice of a woman who had spent 40 years ringing groceries and 40 more before that. Raising a family and 40 before that being raised by hers had not been crazy. Stubborn, yes, not crazy. There was a difference, and she had spent her life trying to teach it to this town. Some of them had finally learned. That was all she said. She did not stay. She went home. She did not at any point embrace anyone, which was Idony understood exactly how Cressida Draycott had told her she was proud of her. O'Dolly Barnhill came at 2. She was 68, a retired nurse. She had a clipboard. She had Idony noted the posture of a woman who had at some point in her life given orders in a critical care unit and would, if pressed, do so again. She sat down on the porch step. She opened the clipboard. Her father, she began, had come home from Korea in March of 1953. His hemoglobin had been 7. He had been so weak he had wept when he saw a cardinal. He had recovered. He had raised them. He had whistled while he shaved. She had 311 photographs of him. Not one of them was labeled. She would like to hire Idony at whatever hourly rate she considered fair to sort them, label them, and archive them here at Amberleaf with a copy for her and her sister and her brother. She had the funds. She was not asking a favor. She was proposing a professional arrangement. Idony did not for a moment speak, because she had not until Odalie sat down on the porch step considered that this was work. that this was in fact something a person could do for a living. Yes, she said, she would do that. $50 an hour, O'Daly proposed. 30 I'd and he countered. 40 O'Daly amended and she'd bring lunch. They shook. That was Idany Ridgway's first archival contract. $2,000, paid the following Friday. Frank came at 5. He had in his hand a folded thing that was not a letter. It was a soft-brimmed field cap, olive drab, faded, a star on the front. It had been in another life a cap the U.S. Army had issued to a private named Amos R. Pickens on his way to a hill nobody remembered. Frank set it on the oak table. Inside the cap, tucked into the band, was a small piece of paper, yellowed, folded twice, in Bertram Ridgway's small hand. Amos Pickens is remembered here. He is not alone. Bertram had written it, Frank told Idany when she asked in 1985, when Elva Pickens, Frank's mother, had brought the cap up to Amberleaf and asked Bertram to keep it, because Elva Pickens had by then been dying and had wanted the cap to belong somewhere that would not, when she was gone, forget what it was. Frank did not this time say more. He set the cap on the table. He set his hand on top of the cap. He looked at Idany. Idany put her hand on top of his hand. She did not say anything. That was Frank. That was the third of the three things. Now here is where I need you to picture this. Because Bertram Ridgway did not leave Idany a farm. He left her a system, 40 years of ledgers, 47 families, a town that had never known it had been saved, a dog that had waited for her on the porch since the night before she'd arrived, a stubborn man's shield of noise built alone in November of '87 to protect a life he could not otherwise defend, a 10-year-old boy in a side room in the winter of '78 whose small hand had gripped his mother's coat, a 20-year-old girl, 6 months, a widow to her own mother, with $6 in her purse and 3 nights in a car behind her, whom he had chosen she would find in the last ledger. The entry one summer in 2014, when Merrill had brought her up the mountain, and Bertram had watched an 8-year-old girl sit on the porch step and put her small hand out toward an older dog that had back then still had both good eyes and had said without looking up at her mother that he was tired, Mama, that she shouldn't make him come to them. Bertram had in his own hand in the ledger written that night, the child noticed. She waited. She let the animal come at his own pace. She is the one. Idany would find that entry in December. She would read it and set the ledger down and cross the kitchen and stand at the window over the sink for a long time. The three of them signed the papers in the second week of December. The lawyer from Knoxville drew them. Idany kept the land in 1/3 of the operating share of what they had by then begun to call Amberleaf Archive. Frank Loomis bought 1/3 paid in installments against archival revenue. Nariah Pickens's third was held in trust by Frank to pass to Nariah on her 18th birthday, on the condition, Nariah's condition, not Frank's, that she finish high school in 1 year of community college first. Nariah had insisted. At the kitchen table, she had said she didn't want to own something she hadn't had to work for, and Frank had said quietly that was Elva's mouth talking, and Nariah had gone red. The Tennessee Historical Commission designated Amberleaf Farm a historic property on the 3rd of February. They came in the second week of March to hang the plaque. Frank stood on the porch. Nariah stood beside him in a new coat that fit properly for the first time in 3 years. Cressida Draycott had come and had this time embraced Idany once briefly, and had then stood back at the porch rail with her arms crossed in case anyone got the idea it was going to happen again. O'Daly Barnhill was there, and had brought her sister and her brother, and had at the ceremony cried openly for a father who had died in 1988 and had whistled while he shaved, and the woman who had brought her husband's love letters, and the man who had brought his father's arrowheads, and the widow who had brought the purple heart from the nightstand. Copper lay on the porch rug with his gray muzzle on his paws. Idany stood in her mother's blue cardigan with the flannel patch on the elbow and her mother's wedding band on the silver chain, and she did not, in the ceremony, cry. She cried later. Alone, in the kitchen, standing at the window, because grief does not, as it turns out, leave. It moves. It moves from a place where it was locked to a place where it can breathe. And that Idony had learned in one October in Tennessee was the difference. Now, and I promise you, I am almost done. Let me tell you about the girl in the driveway. It was a Thursday in the middle of April. The wisteria on the porch had begun to threaten purple. Copper had gone gray at the throat. Frank had come that morning in shirt sleeves to sand a warped board on the Whitethorn Bridge. Nariah had that week been elected class secretary in the 7th grade, which she had complained about publicly and been proud of privately in equal measure. A blue Honda came up the drive at 4 in the afternoon. It stopped where visitors stopped, just past the bridge. The driver got out, a girl of about 19, a canvas duffel bag on the passenger seat, a cardigan on her shoulders, dark green with a patch on the left elbow, in a rectangle of tan fabric that did not quite match, a face that had been holding something down for a long time. Idony was on the porch. She stood. The girl looked up at her. She did not at first come forward. She held out a folded slip of paper. She read from it. County Social Services, she began. They had said there was a woman up here who the girl's voice did not shake. Not quite. Her mother had died in February. She was 19. She couldn't make rent. They had given her Idony's name. Idony walked down the porch steps. She did not hurry, because a stubborn old dog had taught her once that you let the animal come at his own pace. She stopped 3 feet from the girl. She asked her name. Marley's, the girl said. Marlis Amarine. Marlis, Idony repeated. She had a room. It had been her great-uncle's side room. It was heated. There was a bed. There was a lock on the door inside the door so Marley's could lock it if she needed to. There was coffee in the morning. There was work if she wanted it. Not charity. Work. She would be paid. Marley's Amarine's face did the small thing. Idony reached into the pocket of her mother's cardigan. She had that morning, she did not know why, or she had known and had not said it out loud, even to herself. Put a folded $20 bill into that pocket, along with a spare brass key she had 3 months ago, had cut at Nash & Son Hardware. She took out both. She put the brass key in Marlise's hand. She put the 20 in Marlise's other hand. She said in the voice her Uncle Bertram had used to a woman named Ida in November of 1978 that most people walked into an old house and asked what it was worth. If Marley's was asking what had happened here, she could stay as long as she needed. Marley's Amarine, 19 years old, did not cry, because she had learned in the last 2 months not to. But her fingers closed on the brass key. Copper rose from the porch. He walked slowly down the steps. He stopped in front of Marley's Amarine. He sat. Marley's, without any prompting, without any thinking, put her hand out at hip height and did not extend it further. She let the dog come. Copper leaned his gray muzzle into her palm. Idony looked at the two of them at the bottom of the porch steps at a Thursday afternoon in April at Amberley Farm. She thought about a 14-year-old girl scanning photographs in a small stable room and a retired history teacher sanding a bridge board 100 yards off, and a 78-year-old woman ringing groceries in a general store in town, and 40 green ledgers on a bench in a room the town had feared for 30 years, and a folded field cap under glass in a case in the kitchen with a piece of paper in Bertram's small hand tucked into the band. She thought about a stubborn man in a photograph on a mantel with his hand on the side of a red barn standing there in a life that had cost him a wife, so that this Thursday afternoon in April could happen. She thought about her mother. She thought briefly, without pain, about $6 on a notary's counter. She thought about a phrase Frank Loomis had said twice now in her hearing. A house isn't the walls, it's who you refuse to let vanish from inside them. She turned. She led the girl and the dog up the porch steps into a house that had once been feared and was now at last simply lived in. At the top of the steps, she paused. "Welcome home, Marley's," she said without turning back. She said it exactly the way she had the night before practice saying it, because a girl of 20 had learned over one Tennessee winter that the words worth saying are the words worth rehearsing. She said it exactly the way her Uncle Bertram Ridgway would have said it, if he had lived to see it. I did not, but he had built the porch. He had built the room. He had built in a hand that had gone spidered with age the words, "For Idony" on a brass plate on a door under his kitchen floor. And he had, in the last stubborn thing he did, made sure the girl he had chosen one summer on a porch step in 2014 would be standing at this door on this Thursday afternoon in April with a brass key and a $20 bill and would know exactly what to do. The wisteria bloomed a week later. Marley stayed until she didn't need to. She was replaced in June by a boy of 18 named Eli, aged out of foster care in Chattanooga. He was replaced in August by a woman of 46 who had left a marriage and had nowhere. They kept coming. They keep coming. The ledgers have grown. There are 41 now. Neriah, who is finishing her second year of college and is by every account the sharpest thing the Loomis line has produced, will one day, if she keeps her promise, take the ledgers on. She has already started her own. Frank sits on the porch most afternoons. He has gone thin. His hand shakes some when he pours coffee. He does not when Idony sits beside him pretend that it doesn't. Cressida Draycott died last spring. She left in her will a small enamel tin blue with white flowers of the last apple butter she had made. It came in a plain box on a Tuesday morning with no card. Idony understood. Copper died in the fall. He was old. He is buried under the maple by the Whitethorn Bridge. He is remembered. He is not alone. Idony Ridgway is 23 years old now. She still wears the blue cardigan with the flannel patch on the elbow. It has a second patch now on the other elbow in a slightly different tan. That is not a criticism. That is a description. She stands on the porch of Amberleaf Farm most mornings before the light. She counts the day's coffee. She feeds a younger dog, now a mutt with a notched right ear this time, in one white paw, who was left tied to the porch rail on a night in January by a woman none of them saw. She lifts most mornings her mother's wedding band on the silver chain at her throat, and she touches it once and she lets it fall. She whispers most mornings the same three words she had that first October whispered to a kitchen full of held breath. "I'm here, Uncle Bert." The house most mornings does not answer, but somewhere deep in a wall she still cannot see a small iron latch settles with a click into place. And a stubborn old bell on a stubborn old post beside a stubborn old stable in a stubborn old fold of the Tennessee Hills rings, once with no wind, no wire, no hand. Just once, as if to say good.